What would you do if you woke up one morning to find your entire livelihood reduced to ashes? The smell of smoke yanked me out of sleep before the cold morning air even had a chance. It wasn't the comforting kind, like a fireplace in winter or a backyard bonfire. No, this was sharp, acrid, wrong. The kind that meant something was burning that shouldn't be. My stomach dropped as I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I barely had time to shove my boots on before I was sprinting outside, the frost-covered ground biting at my skin. The second I turned the corner of the barn, the breath whooshed out of me like a punch to the gut. My hay bales, my entire winter feed for the livestock, were nothing but a towering inferno. Flames devoured the stacks, twisting and writhing, spitting glowing embers into the sky like fireworks. The heat slammed into me, stealing what little air I had left. For a moment, I could only stare, dumbfounded. Thousands of dollars in hay, months of preparation, everything I had worked for, going up in smoke right before my eyes. Panic snapped me out of my daze. I grabbed the nearest hose and cranked it on full blast, aiming a jet of water at the flames. But it was useless, like throwing a glass of water at a house fire. The flames laughed at me, crackling and roaring as they ate through the last of my feed. My cows, penned safely in the distance, mooed nervously, sensing the disaster unfolding around them. Then came the sirens. The fire department pulled in fast, red and blue lights slicing through the dawn, but I already knew the truth. They were too late. By the time they got the flames under control, all that was left were blackened stumps of what used to be my hay bales. The ground was littered with charred remains, the air thick with the bitter stench of burnt grass. Sheriff Tom Grayson arrived right behind the fire trucks, stepping out of his car with a look that told me this was bad. I barely registered him as I stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. Then the fire chief walked over, shaking his head. "This wasn't an accident," he said grimly. "This was arson." The word hit like a bullet. My mind raced. Who would do something like this? Who hated me enough to burn my farm to the ground? And then it clicked. My blood boiled hotter than the flames as one name surged to the front of my mind. Karen Withers. The woman had been complaining about my hay bales for months. They were blocking her view. They were an eyesore. She had even filed a complaint to have them removed, but the county dismissed it. I thought she'd eventually get over it. Clearly, I was wrong. I turned to Sheriff Grayson, voice tight with fury. "Do you have any proof?" "We'll need to investigate," he said, watching me carefully. "If you have any security cameras, now would be the time to check them." Security cameras. Hope sparked in my chest. My cousin Ethan had set up a system last spring after raccoons broke into my feed shed. If there was any justice in the world, those cameras had caught Karen in the act. And if they had, she was going to pay. I didn't waste a second. Leaving the smoldering remains of my hay behind, I stormed back into the house, my hands still shaking from rage and adrenaline. My boots tracked soot across the wooden floor, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. 15 minutes later, his truck rumbled up the driveway. He barely had time to step out before I was dragging him inside, my words coming out in a furious rush. "The cameras. We need to check them. Now." Ethan didn't argue. He knew better. He set his laptop on the kitchen table, fingers flying over the keys as he pulled up the security footage. I leaned over his shoulder, my pulse pounding in my ears as the screen flickered to life. Come on," I muttered, my fingers drumming against the table. And then we saw it. A shadowy figure near the hay bales, moving carefully, deliberately. The timestamp showed just past midnight. The person was dressed in dark clothes, their face hidden. A flicker of light. A tiny flame sparked to life, and then, whoosh. The fire spread like it had been waiting for the opportunity. The figure stood there for a moment, watching, before slipping away into the night. My hands clenched into fists. It wasn't crystal clear, but I knew that posture, that height, that shape. My gut screamed the truth. Karen. Ethan sighed. It's good, but not good enough. She'll say it's just a shadow. A random trespasser. There's no way a court takes this as proof. I gritted my teeth. He was right. Karen was smart in the worst way. She wouldn't just roll over and confess because I confronted her with some blurry footage. If I wanted her to go down for this, I needed more. So I went to get it. I pounded on Karen's door so hard I hoped it rattled her teeth. When she opened it, her smug expression was already in place. She took a slow sip from her oversized coffee mug, eyes half-lidded in boredom. Well, if it isn't Farmer Boy, she drawled. What brings you to my doorstep at this ungodly hour? I was past playing games. You know exactly why I'm here, I snapped. My hay bales. Gone. Burned. And I think you had something to do with it. She tilted her head, blinking at me like I'd accused her of stealing candy from a convenience store instead of committing a felony. That's terrible, she said flatly. But I was at book club last night. You can ask any of the ladies. We were discussing Great Expectations. I narrowed my eyes. Last time you had a book club, it was just an excuse to drink wine and gossip about the mailman. She shrugged, the corner of her lips twitching. Multitasking is a skill. Every word that came out of her mouth made me want to throttle her. But I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't get me anywhere. I have security footage, I said instead, watching her closely. Someone was at my farm last night. Setting the fire. It looks a lot like you. For the first time, something flickered across her face. A tiny crack in her confidence. But she recovered fast, setting her mug down with a hollow clink. Please, she scoffed. If you had actual proof, you wouldn't be standing here trying to scare me. You'd be calling the cops. I clenched my jaw. She was right. What I had wasn't enough to get her arrested. But it was enough to make her nervous. Just then, Sheriff Tom's cruiser pulled into my driveway. Before I could react, Karen's expression changed, just for a second, a flash of something ugly in her eyes. She wasn't just smug. She was planning something. And then I found out exactly what. By the time I got back to my house, Miguel, one of my farmhands, was waiting on the porch, his face pale. She called the sheriff, he said, his voice tight. She told them I was near the hay bales last night. My blood turned to ice. Karen was trying to frame Miguel. She's lying, I said immediately. I know she is. Miguel swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I have a family, Jake. If they even think I had something to do with this. They won't, I interrupted. Because we're going to prove who really did it. Miguel nodded slowly, but I could still see the worry in his eyes. I watched as Sheriff Tom stepped out of his cruiser, tipping his hat at me. Got a call from Ms. Withers, he said. She says she saw one of your workers lurking near the hay bales before the fire. I turned to look at Karen's house, my hands clenching into fists. She was watching from her window, smirking. That was it. That was the moment I decided. This wasn't just about getting justice anymore. This was war. The worst thing about Karen wasn't just that she was evil, it was that she thought she was untouchable. She had spent years getting away with everything, twisting the truth, manipulating people, making herself look like the victim while she destroyed everything around her. I wasn't going to let her win. The next day, I walked up to her house again, this time with a different approach. I forced myself to look defeated, keeping my shoulders slumped, rubbing the back of my neck like I was embarrassed. When she opened the door, she took one glance at me and smirked, like she had already won. "I just came to say that I overreacted," I muttered, keeping my tone low and grudging. "I don't have any proof, and I probably won't get any. I guess I just have to accept that the fire was an accident." Karen raised an eyebrow, her lips curving upward as she took a long sip from her ever-present wine glass. "Look at you," she said, amusement dripping from her voice. "Finally using some common sense." I forced a laugh, shaking my head. "Yeah, I guess I was just upset. That was a lot of hay, you know. Cost me a fortune. I don't even know how I'll recover from it." She leaned against the doorframe, her grip on her wine glass just a little too tight. I saw the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she let out a slow breath. She thought she had won. "That's what happens when you put a bunch of dry grass in one place," she said, tilting her head. "Fires. Maybe you should be more careful next time." I nodded, pretending to absorb her oh-so-helpful wisdom. "Yeah, weird, though. The fire department said it started from an open flame. Like, someone actually said it." She shrugged, "Too fast, too forced. Well, that's ridiculous. Who would do something like that?" "Yeah, I agreed. That's what I was thinking. But I guess I have to let it go. No evidence, no case, right?" She smirked again, that same insufferable smirk that made my blood boil. "Exactly. The moment I got back to my house, I played the recording. Every single word she had just said was captured perfectly on my phone. But the best part? She had just acknowledged how the fire started. "She's too arrogant," Ethan said, grinning as he listened. I nodded. "Now we just need something bigger. Something that leaves no room for doubt." And that was when the idea hit me. Karen thought she had gotten away with it. She wouldn't be careful, she would be overconfident. The next day, I staged a fire drill. I called up a couple of my farmhands, borrowed a fog machine from the community theater, and set up a controlled burn in a fire pit, a good distance from the main property. Then I made sure Karen saw. Right on cue, as soon as the smoke started rising, Karen burst out of her house. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her voice shrill. "Not again," she shrieked. Sheriff Tom, who had conveniently been stopping by the farm, turned toward her slowly, his eyebrows shot up. "Not again," he repeated. Realizing her mistake, Karen's mouth snapped shut. I saw the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. I meant, fires happen all the time," she said quickly. "This town is just full of careless people." Tom's expression didn't change. "Uh-huh." I stepped forward, keeping my tone casual. "Huh. That's funny, Karen. You never seemed concerned about fires before. In fact, you've been complaining about my hay bales for months." She huffed, flipping her hair like she was above all of this. "Oh, please, Sheriff. This is ridiculous. I have better things to do than talk about some silly little farm fire." Tom didn't budge. "You seem pretty jumpy for someone with nothing to hide." Karen let out a short, forced laugh. "I have places to be." "Yeah, your book club, right?" I said, tilting my head. "What was it you were reading again? How to Get Away with Arson?" Her eyes flashed, but before she could open her mouth, Tom turned to me. "Jake, why don't you and I take another look at that security footage?" I grinned. "Great idea, Sheriff." Karen stiffened. As soon as she turned on her heel and slammed her door shut, Ethan nudged my shoulder. "You see that?" he whispered. I nodded. "Oh, I saw it." Back at the house, Ethan was already digging deeper into her alibi. "I called a few of the book club ladies," he said, groaning. "Guess what? Karen left early that night, said she had a headache." "You wanna guess what time she left?" I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. "Let me guess. right around the time the fire started. Ethan grinned. Bingo! That was the final nail in her coffin. The next morning, Sheriff Tom showed up at Karen's house with a warrant. I made sure to be outside, casually fixing a fence, just so I could watch the chaos unfold. Karen came storming out of her house, her hair still in curlers, demanding to know what was happening. When Tom told her they were searching for evidence related to the fire, she went pale. "I don't have anything like that," she snapped, crossing her arms. "This is harassment." Tom ignored her. 20 minutes later, one of the deputies came out, holding something in a plastic bag. "Sheriff," he called. "You're gonna want to see this." It was a pair of boots. Designer. Expensive looking. And covered in what looked suspiciously like ash. Tom held them up, his expression unreadable. "Karen, these look a lot like the ones you're always wearing. You wanna explain this?" For the first time, Karen didn't have a response. Her mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. Nothing came out. I stepped forward, crossing my arms. "Looks like you stepped in your own mess." She snapped her head toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You set me up." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean I forced you to set my hay bales on fire?" Tom chuckled. Karen sputtered, trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing came. As they put her in the back of the squad car, she turned and hissed, "You think this is over, Jake?" I gave her a slow, satisfied grin. "Oh, I'm pretty sure it is." And as the car pulled away, I finally let out a long breath. Karen had finally gotten what she deserved. But something told me the best part was still yet to come. The whole town buzzed with the news of Karen's arrest. The barbershop, the diner, even the grocery store checkout lanes were filled with whispers and speculation. People couldn't believe it. Karen Withers, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, had finally gotten what was coming to her. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. I was proven right when Ethan barged into my kitchen 2 days later, phone in hand, grinning like a lunatic. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Try me." He turned the screen toward me, showing a smug-looking man in a tailored suit, standing outside the courthouse. "That's Philip Langston," Ethan said. "Karen's new lawyer." I exhaled sharply. Of course she hired some hotshot. "Oh, it gets better," Ethan said, scrolling through an article. "He's claiming some drifter set the fire. Says you've got no real proof Karen did it." I nearly choked on my coffee. A drifter? Seriously? "Oh, and you'll love this part," Ethan continued, eyes dancing with amusement. "He's also saying you set her up because you have some kind of personal vendetta against her." I stared at him for a long moment, then let out a harsh laugh. "She burned my damn farm down, and I'm the bad guy?" Ethan smirked. "Apparently. I should have been furious, but honestly, it was just hilarious." Karen had spent years bullying everyone around her, acting like she was untouchable, and now that the tables had turned, she was desperate. The worst part? She probably thought it would work. But she had underestimated just how much this town despised her. The trial date was set for the following week, and by the time the day arrived, I walked into the courthouse feeling like I was about to watch the season finale of a drama series. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her pastel pink suit making her look like a washed-up real estate agent. Philip Langston sat beside her, all polished and smug, flipping through papers like he was planning to wipe the floor with the prosecution. I took my seat next to Sheriff Tom, who leaned over and muttered, "I can't wait to see her squirm." The prosecutor didn't waste any time. He laid out everything: the security footage, Karen's recorded confession, the burned boots found in her garage. Philip Langston tried his best to poke holes in the case, but every time he made a point, the prosecutor calmly countered it. With each argument, Karen's smug expression started to crack. Then came the moment that sealed the deal. Sheriff Tom stood up and presented the final piece of evidence. A witness statement. Not just any witness. Greg Whitman, Karen's own housemate. The courtroom went dead silent as Greg walked to the stand, refusing to even look at Karen. "I never thought I'd be doing this," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "But I can't keep covering for her." Karen shot up from her chair, face flushed with fury. "Greg, what are you doing?" He still didn't look at her. "I heard her that night," he continued. "She came home smelling like smoke, mumbling about how she had finally taught that farmer a lesson." The courtroom erupted. Karen looked like she was about to explode. Her lawyer paled, sinking lower in his seat. And just like that, it was over. The judge called for order before finally announcing the verdict. Karen Withers, guilty of arson. The sentencing was almost poetic. No jail time, but instead, she was ordered to pay a hefty fine and, this was the best part, serve community service. At my farm. The look on her face was priceless. By the time the courtroom emptied, half the town was already talking about it, and someone, probably Ethan, had already started printing t-shirts that said, "Justice for the hay bales." But the best part was still to come. Karen was about to learn exactly what it felt like to be on the other end of things. The first day of Karen's community service was, without a doubt, one of the most satisfying moments of my life. She showed up in oversized designer sunglasses, a brand new flannel shirt that had probably cost more than my tractor, and a scowl so deep it looked like it had been carved into her face. I met her at the barn, handing her a bucket and a shovel. "Welcome to the job, Karen," I said, barely hiding my grin. "Hope you like manure." She recoiled like I'd handed her a live snake. "This is beneath me," she snapped. "Not according to the court," I replied. For the next 2 months, Karen was forced to do everything she once complained about. She fed the animals, stacked hay bales, cleaned stalls, and every time she grumbled, I reminded her that it was this or jail. The town made sure she didn't forget either. Everywhere she went, people snickered. Someone even printed a poster of her shoveling manure and hung it in the diner. Her humiliation was complete, but I knew Karen wasn't the type to change. She still acted like she was better than everyone, but she had been humbled in the only way that mattered. Then, one morning, Ethan came by the farm, laughing as he held up his phone. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, turning the screen toward me. It was a real estate listing. Karen's house. For sale. I stared at the screen, then let out a slow, satisfied breath. Guess she finally had enough. Ethan smirked. I think she realized she messed with the wrong farmer. As I watched the moving trucks pull up to her driveway a week later, I knew that, in the end, Karen had burned my hay, but she had only burned herself. Have you ever dealt with a Karen who thought they were untouchable? How did it end? Share your stories below. I'd love to hear just how bad they can get.